Hey folks, we are live at iamdeveloper.live. My name's Nick Taylor, your host, and today I'm hanging out with Jessica Wilkins. Jessica, how you doing today?
I'm good. Hey, everybody.
Cool, cool. Just want to say this is the last stream I'm gonna be doing for the year officially. I think I might do some like live coding on my own next week or something, but for all intents and purposes, it's the last stream for this year. Lots of other great guests coming on in 2023, but anyways, with that out of the way, yeah. So Jessica, I guess for folks who don't know who you are, would you mind kind of just giving a little explainer of who the myth, the magical legend Jessica is?
Yes, the myth behind Jessica there. Yeah, so my name is Jessica Wilkins. I'm a software developer over at This Labs. I'm a career changer. And so my former career was actually a classical musician. I was a professional oboist and played all throughout Southern California doing recording sessions and orchestras and operas and the whole spiel there. So that was my life prior to code. And yeah, today we're just going to kind of talk about that wacky, crazy journey.
Yeah, it sounds pretty cool to be honest. And before we get into talking about how you got into music, I'm curious of because I mean I did I played handbells in a choir at one point. I played piano when I was a kid, and I think I did what at least most people in my area of town did was like every kid in elementary school learned to play the recorder at some point.
Yep, that was me
Um,
too.
yeah.
Yep.
So I guess my first question before we get into how you got into music is I'm not really sure what an oboe is. I know it's flute like, is that right? Or
Not quite.
okay,
It's
okay, I'm
within
already
like the
wrong.
woodwind family. Yeah, yeah, no worries. Yeah, so the oboe is a woodwind instrument, and so it's within that same woodwind family of like clarinet and
Okay.
saxophone. And technically, like the flute is part of the woodwind family as
Okay.
well. And but the oboe is a special type of instrument. It's called like a double reed instrument,
Okay.
and it's really hard to play, get it
Okay.
sounding just right there. But when you get it sounding just right, it sounds really good. But when it want to misbehave, then it's like fun times. So I always think of like
Yeah.
the oboe as like this like troubled teenager that sometimes behaves, and then other times it's just being a brat. And so that was my whole career there. Was just trying
Okay, okay.
to get it to sound nice on cue there. But yeah, that's the
Okay.
oboe in a nutshell.
Okay, cool. And I haven't played any woodwind instruments. I mean, unless like and well, because I don't think a recorder falls under that. I feel like that's like kind of a little lower grade. But the reeds you're talking about, the reeds like the from what I understand, it's like the little wooden piece that you use to help play, right? Like you replace them.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Actually, I think I have. Aha, we're in luck. I actually have my reed
Aha.
case on the on the table, so I can show you real fast there. So yeah, so this is what the reed looks like, and then you
Okay.
have like the opening in between here. So like all like most professional oboists will make their own reeds, and there's
Oh,
like a
no
whole
way.
process and all that fun stuff. And yeah, so I would make reeds when I was working as a professional there, and so you blow the air all the way through like these like two small blades all the way through the instrument there. So it's
Oh, okay.
interesting how all
I
that fun stuff works.
I guess I have a couple of things there. One, I didn't realize that people made their own. I thought it for some reason, and I didn't realize it had a thin, like almost like straw-like structure. I for some reason, I don't know. This is my misunderstanding of woodwind instruments. For some
No
reason,
worries.
I thought I was picturing like like a popsicle stick, not as long, but like sitting on where you blow, and I thought it was somehow to help,
Yes.
but
Hmm.
but you're actually blowing
Yeah.
through the reed. That I didn't realize.
Yeah, so actually for clarinet and saxophone, you have a mouthpiece and then you have the reed that just goes like right up against it. And so theirs is
Okay.
like a little bit different there, but then for ours we just have like two pieces of cane tied together and then you just blow through the
Okay.
small opening there all the way down to the instrument. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's super cool. Oh, hey, how's it going, Parasocial Fix? Just gonna say hi. Um, This is one thing you get used to after streaming for a while is context switching quite a bit.
Right.
It's like, hey, I'm having a conversation. Also, there's somebody saying something here and somebody saying something over there
Right.
too. Cool, cool. So, okay, yeah. So before we, I don't know, I think we got lots to talk about here, but I guess my first question is, how did you get into music? Like I was saying, like for myself, I think it's something that a lot of schools it exists, or like my parents just the babysitter I had when I was younger, she played piano too, so I think they just said, oh, I guess this is a good idea that my son should learn piano, kind of like not that I hated it, but it's like that's just kind of how I was thrown into it. I was curious like how you got into music and why you continued to stay in music.
Yeah. So I actually also started on piano when I was 7 years old, and my grandmother had a piano in her house, and we used to live with her before we moved to Palm Springs, California. And so she had a piano in her living room, and I would, as just like a little kid, just kind of play around
Okay.
with it. I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't read music or anything, but I was just having fun because I was curious. I was like, this looks fun. And my grandma was like,
Okay.
she seems to take a liking to that. Maybe we should get her some lessons. And my mom signed me up for lessons there. And so I had like
Cool.
30-minute weekly lessons with a really nice woman named Vicky. And she would, I always remember like we would have like these little exercise books, and I would prepare little exercises each week and practice. And then at
Okay.
the end, she had like this little like she called her treasure chest, and she had like candy and
Okay.
like toys and stuff like that. And so that was always the
Okay.
fun part too, as like a 7-year-old getting rewarded with like a piece of
Yeah.
candy and like a small little toy afterwards for playing. And so that's kind of where it all got started
Okay.
there. And so I was playing piano for a few years just as a young kid, just for fun. And then in fifth grade, they had a weekly band program. And
Okay.
actually, it was interesting because it was run by the middle school band director at one of the neighboring middle schools. And I don't know how he like fitted it all in his schedule, but he would like go around to some of the elementary schools and teach a band class. And there was a limited amount of instruments just because of like budgets and funding and all that. And so you had like
Okay.
5 choices, which was like flute, trumpet, trombone, clarinet, and then percussion. But like their idea of percussion
Yeah.
was like, here's a drum pad, so it wasn't
Okay.
like,
Okay.
it wasn't like, here's a drum set. It was like, here's a drum pad, and we'll teach you some
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
basics and whatnot. And so you had to like pick from one of those instruments there. And so I picked trumpet. I was like, that
Yeah.
looks cool. Let's go pick that out. And so we signed it out, and I could not for the life of me play any trumpet, and it was rough. I couldn't get any sounds because you have to like have a really good ear to kind of find those pitches, and I just
Hmm.
couldn't do it. I was not a brass player. I was never meant to be a brass player there. So I have like mad respect for my brass player friends because it was bad. And so but
Yeah.
I stuck with it for the year, and like I was in good because we were all just like starting out and just having fun. And so, but I was like, I don't want to keep doing trumpet, but I want to be in band next year with the rest of my friends. So what do I do? And I
Yeah.
can't play piano because I have to pick like some sort of wind instrument. And so I
Okay.
met with the band director that at the middle school I was going at, because my mom actually used to teach at that same middle school. She was like, hey, my daughter wants to play, but she's not really liking the trumpet, and can we find something? And he's like, yeah, we'll figure something out. So I went over to visit, and I was like ending fifth grade, about to go into sixth grade, and I met with him in the band room. He's like, you know what? You look like an oboe player. And I had no clue what he was talking about. I'd never heard of the oboe. I was like, I don't know what that is, but sure. And he's like, yeah, come on. And so he like got out this like little oboe case and put it together for me and got a read. And he like showed me how to, make my embouchure and make all the sound and stuff. He's like, okay, now you give it a try. And I like honked out some sort of note, and he's like, great, you're our new oboe player next year. I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
You made a noise with it, so you're hired.
Exactly. Yep. That was the criteria. And I was just like, okay, cool. Let's go do that. And so it was just really funny. And so he's like, look, there's this really nice lady in the community that can help and give you lessons. And so just meet up with her. And her name was Lynn, and I worked with her for a few years when I was first getting started. So I meet her weekly and play in
Okay.
the band, and I had a lot of fun, and I started to take a liking to it and started to kind of understand how to make it sound pretty at times and still honking away at times. But it was really cool getting more involved in music and playing with the band. And then we also did marching
Yeah.
band, so I started learning clarinet because I wanted. It was like a big social activity where I was like, I want to do this
Mhm.
and this and this, and we got to do band trips like to Disneyland and stuff like that. And so
Oh,
that was
cool.
pretty cool too. And then around like high school, I was like, well, what am I gonna do with,
Hmm.
what's the next step? Because I was always told like you're gonna go to college for something. I'm like, okay, well, what
Yeah.
am I gonna go for? And I'm like, I really like music, so maybe we should just go for that. And so I started preparing to get into music schools and was fortunate enough to get into like my dream school that I thought was just a complete long shot. I was only applying because I wanted to meet the professor. I didn't think I was ever going to get in, but I was like fortunate enough to actually get in and study music. So that's kind of the journey of my early music years there.
That's super cool, and I do have some more questions about it. But Anthony in the chat, who was a music teacher and is a musician, is curious: single reed versus double reed. Like, what's I guess I don't know. I imagine it plays differently, obviously, with one or two. Like, I guess it's is it mainly preference, or does it allow you to play it louder? Or I honestly don't know. I'm curious.
Yeah, no worries there. So with like single reed with like clarinets and saxophones there, you have like a nice stable mouthpiece that really doesn't change. It's just like a hunk of plastic, and then you have this
Yeah.
like reed, tied to it, and so you have this ligature that kind of binds the two together. So that stable force is really nice, and it helps because if your reeds change due to weather or if like the wear and tear of reeds and stuff like that, at least you have some sort of stability. And there's other
Yeah.
challenges to like clarinet and saxophone too. But then with double reeds, you just have those two pieces of cane there like slapped together. And so it could be a little bit, depending on like the weather and changes and stuff like that, a little more volatile to try to control. And also reeds are more expensive, unfortunately, for double reeds for
Okay.
both like oboe and bassoon, as opposed to, because like with clarinet players and saxophone players, they could buy like a whole box of reeds and they kind of pick which ones they like and play them. But
Okay.
with oboe, you buy it like, one or two at a time, and they're like 15, $20 starting
Oh
out
wow,
per
that
reed.
expensive. Okay.
Yeah, versus like a box
Okay.
of reeds for like 20. So you're just like, you really have to be committed to to what
Ye-
to actually play this thing and start out on it for sure.
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to be like 10 years later. Yeah, I'm bankrupt. It's
Right.
the reeds.
Spend
The
it all on
reeds.
reeds. So
Yeah.
that's why a lot
I
of people like make their own reeds, because over time, because you make it at such high volumes that it ends up being cheaper there. If at the
Okay.
professional level, at the like if you're just starting out, I would never advise students to run out buy all the retools if they're like not even sure if they're
Okay,
going to stick
okay.
with it
Yeah, yeah.
2 months down the line. That would be a waste there. But yeah.
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, no. And getting back to what you're saying about like, wanting to hang out with your friends and stuff and going on the trips and stuff. I totally feel that. I mean, I, I see that from when I played sports, but also like I said, I was in that handbell choir, and for me, it. I mean, I had fun playing them, but for me, when I joined that, it was really to get out of church because like this was something that was offered at church, and
Right.
I just church was always boring for me, and so when you're on this handbell choir, you were in this different section of the church because like the choir had to be in a certain area, so I was basically just hanging with my friends all the time, and and then we did a few trips too, probably not as far as you did, but I think we made it to North Carolina at one point, but it was all
Oh,
like
cool.
just driving and stuff. But it's fun, it's fun hanging out with people you like hanging with, right? So
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and then so you went to school to learn, continue and learn more professionally, and you are an oboist, but you're I don't know how well known you are, but I know that from what you told me at one point, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you play in the orchestra for the NFL for like was it the
hmm
World, not World Cup? Sorry, I'm I don't I don't
Wrong sport,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
I don't watch football normally. It's usually rugby, but
Right.
what the heck's it called? The Super Bowl. It was it for
Right,
the
right.
Super Bowl or what was it for?
Yeah, yeah. So that was actually one of my last gigs before I went full time professionally, and that was like 3 days before I started with this dot.
Okay.
And I got a call to perform for the Thursday ceremony awards for the National Football League in the
Okay.
states, and they have it every Thursday before the Super Bowl Sunday. And the Super Bowl was actually in California. It was in Inglewood, California, which is a city within Los Angeles County there, and so I got a call to be a part of that orchestra. And I was like, well,
Okay.
that might be a good way to kind of go out with. But I
Yeah,
had done
yeah.
live shows before, and I was like, that's going to be a long day, though. I just knew
Yeah.
mentally it was going to be a lot of rehearsals and live shows. Anything goes, and you just have to roll with it. But I'm really happy that I did it. And it was a great group of people. And it was a great event there. And the host was
Mhm.
great and all of that fun stuff there. So, yeah, I'm really glad that I was able to do like those types of gigs there.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Definitely a great way to go out on top. I guess like in terms of gigs like music gigs like when you first started like I guess you would probably just take whatever gigs were around but like
Mhm.
at one like because obviously playing in the orchestra for the Super Bowl they don't just grab Jimmy down the street, right? Like you clearly had like street cred in terms of like your past work, so like I guess how did they find
Right.
I'm just curious like I'm not really in music circles, so I'm just curious like how they go like, okay, we need an oboist and like Jessica's who we need, like what's that look like finding somebody for an orchestra.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. So, like, usually what happens is there's contractors, and their role is that they have basically like a Rolodex of people that they could just call at any moment. And so someone reaches out to them and says, hey, I've got this gig. I need an orchestra. I need a chamber ensemble, whatever ensemble that they need. And then that
Yeah.
contractor looks through that list and they look at their top people on the list and they're like, okay, I'm going to make a call out for these people and see if they're free, and otherwise I'm just going to keep going down the list there. And so the contractors, they're like going in between uh, both the musicians and I guess the client. And so it's like they'll reach out to you, they'll give you the dates and the time, and you just say, yeah, okay, I'm free, and the pay, of course. And then
Yeah.
or if you're like, oh no, I'm not free, and then sometimes they'll ask you like, oh hey, could you recommend somebody? But a lot of the top contractors, they have this like long list of people that they can
Okay.
call if someone else can't do it there. But yeah, that's usually how that works. And so you spend ridiculous amounts of time just getting your name out there, and it's all about networking, and you live by your how
Okay.
good you play, and your reputation. So if you have a good
Yeah.
reputation, your number gets passed around. If you don't have a good reputation, then it's gonna be a little quiet there. And so like the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
couple of years, I was just really hustling to just get as many performances as I could and get out there.
Okay.
And then once I started building out that reputation, then I was starting to appear on more lists and starting to do really cool gigs, like the NFL one. But yeah, early on, it's because it's really competitive in Los Angeles, and so trying to like get your name out there because
Okay.
there's a lot of really really good players out there. But once you keep at it and you prove that, hey, I can sound pretty sometimes. I can sound good. I promise. They're like, okay,
Yeah.
cool, we'll hire you, and then you get to do some like cool stuff there. So yeah, but that's how the basic process works.
Okay, okay. No, that's pretty awesome, and like hat tip to you for obviously getting scouted to do the NFL orchestra. That's still pretty cool. Like honestly, even if people aren't into music, that's a kind of pretty cool thing to talk about. And yeah, I definitely do want to talk about how you got into coding, but before we do that, I think one thing that I find about music is there's a lot of people in our industry that have come from music, and also uh, I think you know learning music it's I mean maybe other people pick it up easier and stuff, but like you got to be able to read sheet music, working with a ton of people, like it's because being a career changer like these, even though that's not necessarily like coding skills, and coding skills aren't everything for a job anyways, but I
Right.
feel like, you know, the fact that you made it as far as like the orchestra for the NFL, like you've clearly have very good discipline, and you've definitely put in the hours to craft. I don't know. I don't want to sound too cheesy, but you got really good at what you did because you put in the time and stuff, and so there's a lot of qualities I see there that I think translate to in terms, well, not just necessarily working in tech, but like there's a lot of skills there that can transfer to a lot, and that's my terrible segue of trying to get us into talking about code, but
It
um,
worked there.
yeah, but I guess like I know the pandemics happened and stuff, so like I guess kind of like how did you start getting into coding, or like or what happened there exactly, like.
Yeah, that's also an interesting story because, like, I never imagined that I would be in tech. Like, I really thought, and I think a lot of us musicians, because a lot, as you mentioned, a lot of musicians transition from music to tech over the past few years there. And I think a lot of us really envisioned that we would just retire through music. Like, that was going to be our career. And so it's not like we were
Yeah,
like looking for other careers. It's like, no, this is it. This is what we're doing. This is our lives.
yeah.
And then the pandemic happened and everything changed there. And so when the pandemic happened in the States, the shutdown happened in like mid-March there. And I just remember it
Hmm.
was like this sequence of events leading up to that, where literally like 3 weeks beforehand I was just doing all these different performances. I did like a solo performance, and I did a couple of recordings and all this. It was just full steam ahead, and I had my schedule like booked until the end of summer. And I was like, okay, we're rocking and rolling. And I also had a sheet
Yeah,
music company at the time too that I was running, and so I was getting ready for conference season. I was trying to get all that ready. And
yeah.
then, like, I remember the week before, because I did a lot of teaching out in the schools there in music and working with the different woodwind students. I remember there were talks about like maybe closing LA Unified, and LA Unified
Okay,
is one of the largest school districts behind New York Unified. Like, those are two of the
okay.
largest school districts, and it was going to be a big deal if they were going to close. And so there were a lot of rumors about how the board was going to meet and should we close the schools. We're like, they're not going to close the schools. It's too many schools to close. And we were still kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
in that denial phase, you know. But then once they declared it like a world pandemic, and then I think it was that Friday, we were just anxiously checking our phones. I remember I was teaching at a middle school, and all of the coaches and the band director, we were just constantly checking our phone, like, are they going to close this down? Are they going to close it?
Hmm.
Are we going to be closed for a couple of weeks there? And we wanted to keep it quiet from the kids, but there was always that one kid, when the news finally broke that LA Unified was going to be closed for a few weeks, and they he announced it in the class. He's like, oh, did you guys hear, we're going to be closed, we don't have any school. And we're like, oh my gosh, we're trying to keep it under
It's
wraps, not to
happening.
create pandemonium in the class. And so, but you had that
Yeah,
one kid that just like spoiled it for everybody. So it was really
yeah.
funny. But in that moment we're like, okay, well, I guess we'll just
It's
kind of,
happening.
it's happening. And so I still, in my mind, I was like, okay, is this going to be a few weeks or what's going to happen? So it was a tough period not to be able to perform, because it was like a domino
Hmm.
effect of like every single performance I had booked in the spring was canceled. And so it was just one
Okay.
email after another of like, this is canceled, this is canceled, this is canceled. I'm like, okay, this is not as much fun now. So like the only thing I had left was my sheet music company. And so I was fortunate to live off of that during that period. But a lot of musicians were just like, I have zero income, especially musicians top playing for like top orchestras like New York Phil and the Metropolitan Opera. And those positions, they pay ridiculously well because it's really hard to get
Okay.
in. And so they go from like this really high paying job to essentially nothing, which was really, really scary, especially considering that, you're living in high cost cities like New York City. And so it was a really difficult time for all of us musicians. And so that's why I started reaching back out to the community and saying, hey, I've
Okay.
got all this sheet music. I'm going to make some of this freely available, because I know a lot of us are kind of recording with ourselves and doing chamber
Yeah.
music recordings and sharing it. And that's the way that we can kind of stay connected. And so I created this like bundle of free sheet music and started just letting people know and say, hey, it's free, you don't need to pay for it, you can just download it, you don't have to sign in,
Okay.
it's all good. And the community was like, hey, thank you for responding like a human, because some of the other sheet music, not just sheet music, some of the other music retailers, they were just business as usual, because like they were much larger companies, and so they didn't like think to stop their regular marketing emails. And so they're marketing to musicians like, hey, here's our spring sale and buy this and buy that. It's like, oh, it's really insensitive considering they lost all their jobs. And so that was the one time where being like a smaller company worked in
Mm-hmm.
my favor, because I could respond as a human and make that change. Whereas some of the larger companies, they really screwed up by like being really insensitive, trying to like, send marketing messages to musicians
Okay.
that were out of work and like pissing them off essentially. And so during that point, like now we get to June of 2020, and things like pandemic was like nuts in the States, and I'm sure
Yeah.
like all over the place. And then we had all the race relation stuff with George Floyd's murder and whatnot. And so that opened up the discussion about lack of diversity in a lot of industries, and
Okay.
including mine in the classical world specifically, because there's not a lot of Black classical musicians, unfortunately. And so a lot of people started kind of reaching out to me like, hey, how can I
Okay.
learn more about Black musicians and composers? And so I started just handing them off all these resources that I, had throughout the years, because I was just doing research, because I didn't really know about my own background as like, okay, who came before me as a Black classical musician. And so I just started handing off all these resources that I found online. I was like, there really should just be one website for all these resources. It's crazy that I'm sending people like 6 or 7 different links. There should just be like one link. And so that's where I came up with the idea of the Black Excellence Music Project. And I was like, well,
Okay.
I've got some time. Maybe I should learn how to code this thing. And we'll see how it happens. If I don't like coding, then I'll try to figure out some other way to build the site. But I've got some time now, so I could build this site. So that's when the coding journey kind of
Yeah.
began and kind of snowballed from there. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it accidentally, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. Yeah, I was paying attention. I was just looking for the project actually on your GitHub, and I found it.
Oh
Let me
yeah,
just
it's pinned
drop it in the
to
chat,
yeah, yeah.
just if folks want to check it out. And I remember seeing this. I don't have access to the talk right now, but there's a YouTube where, because for folks that don't know, Jessica and myself met through Virtual Coffee, which is one of my favorite communities, probably my favorite. Um, yeah, you gave a talk about that project, I think, and I'll try and add that YouTube to when I put this up on YouTube. Yeah, it was cool seeing that you put that all together, and to your point too about classical musicians. I mean, I would definitely agree with that. And like well, I'm a white guy, so there's that too. But like, I not that I go to the orchestra a lot, but anytime I've ever seen an orchestra, I don't think I've ever seen a Black person in the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's good or bad, but when I associate a musician who's Black, I think of like Dizzy Gillespie, like people playing
Mm-hmm.
trumpet, kind of like blues and stuff, which I mean, that's where a lot of that music came from. But you know what I mean?
Right,
Like
right. Yeah.
that's just where I kind of always associated it, in terms of instruments. I don't know
Right,
if that's good
right,
or
yeah.
bad, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's but that is cool though. Like, uh, was there anything weird about that? Like, would people be like, "Hey, we need this person because, oh, they're not white, so let's do like the tokenization of like our
Mhm.
orchestra, kind of, because there's
Right, right.
I'm definitely no expert on this, but like diversity and tokenization are two very different things, like,
Right, right,
yeah, no,
absolutely.
we got Jessica, so yeah, we're diverse now, kind of like, were you exposed to a lot of that, or was not to get, I don't, wasn't planning on getting too serious
Yeah, yeah,
today,
no
but
worries. Yeah, no, this is all good there. Yeah, for sure. I think like there were definitely times where, like, especially as like a young kid, in a primarily white environment in orchestras and stuff like that, they were like, for promotional materials for music festivals and stuff like that, they would have pictures of like, me with with
Mhm.
others. And I think back and I was like, oh, there was probably some strategy to that, to be like, hey, we're
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
diverse.
yeah.
But if you like just looked at the picture, you're like, oh wow, they're so diverse. But then if you like zoomed out the picture, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, she's like the only black chick and the only
Yeah,
black
yeah.
person in the orchestra. So there's definitely some of that went on. And then even at school, like I went to a really small conservatory in Rochester, New York, which had about
Okay.
900 students between undergrad and grad students there. And there was a very tiny portion of us that were black in the opera and orchestra divisions there. And so,
Mhm.
and of course we had the jazz division too, but there was a small amount of, I would probably say like, I don't know, 8 or 9 of us when I was going to school that were
Okay.
in the classical world and opera world there. So we like all knew each other right away and all that. And so you get very aware of that sometimes, where it's just you or like one other person. And then
Yeah.
and I think the pandemic was interesting because people were like, I want to have this conversation about diversity. I'm like, do you really though? Or is it you just feel like you want to have this conversation? So I was like leery of it at first. I'm like, do people really want it, or do they feel like they have to have it to sound,
Yeah.
politically correct and all that? But yeah, so you saw like the good thing about the pandemic and that conversation is that there were some organizations that did legitimately change, which is good, and they
Okay.
started programming more music by Black composers within the classical world, and we started to learn more about that heritage and that past there. And then there were some organizations that were just doing it for show. And I'll never
Okay. Yeah,
forget,
yeah.
there was one school where they had posted, I think it was Instagram, but they had made a post about diversity. And it was something like, we believe in diversity and we believe in moving that forward. And then the first post they made, they were supposed to, so they had this like little tagline about like pushing diversity and stuff. And then they were supposed to have an
Okay.
image, but the image didn't show. And the alt text showed, and it was like, add some image with black people in it, and that was what showed.
Oh.
And that was their alt text, and so they posted that, and so someone
Oh no.
screenshotted it, and they immediately like took it down because they were just like,
Yeah.
uh-oh. But someone like thought to like screenshot it and call them out. They're like, oh, this is not what we mean by diversity. Don't just like
Yeah.
throw us a bone there. And so there were definitely some like organizations and schools that were like, oh yeah, we're diverse, because they want to just hop on that
Yeah.
train, and then they hopped off shortly after there. So yeah, the pandemic brought some good stuff, and
Good.
then some other stuff from like, I don't think you're really about diversity there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That story makes me kind of laugh in the sense that, hey, at least they made their images accessible.
Right,
Like,
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, they
so
tried. Yeah, exactly.
but yeah,
Yeah,
that's definitely pretty rough, but
yeah,
wow. Cool, cool,
yeah.
cool. Yeah, so yeah, so you did that project, which I remember seeing. It was really great. And then um I know you write at Free Code Camp, and I can't remember if you're a contractor there or if this is just voluntary based, but regardless, I'm curious how you got into Free Code Camp. Like, why did you decide
Yeah.
to start writing there?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually started learning when I back in June 2020. I started with an edX course on HTML and CSS, because with my
Okay.
Googling, I was like, how do I make this website? And like HTML and CSS popped up. I was like, okay, let's start there. So I found this course on edX and signed up and went through it. And I was like, oh, that's fun, and I want to learn more stuff. And so I started learning like how to learn to code for free, and then Free Code Camp popped up. I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And so I joined, I started going through their certifications. And then every time that I ran into a problem, I would inevitably run into a forum post on how to solve
Hmm.
that problem. I was like, oh, this forum sounds really healthy and nice and a nice little community. So I'm going to join. And so I joined, and originally never intended to like be as active as I was. I was just like, oh, I'll just kind of answer questions if it comes up or whatever. I'm just gonna chill in the background. But then I found myself just getting involved in the conversation and just answering questions like, oh yeah, I did that challenge. Here's how you go through that challenge and just helping
Yeah.
people, just connecting with people. And so I got to the point where I was like moving up through because there's like a leaderboard of people that are really active and helpful, and you can mark certain things as like solutions and stuff like that, and similar I guess to Stack Overflow, but like a healthier
Okay.
environment of that.
Yeah.
And so Quincy started to notice like, okay, who's this chick who just popped up out of nowhere being super helpful? I want to meet her. And so he reached out to me on the forum and messaged me, and he was like, hey, I would love to meet you. You seem really cool and interesting. I love how active you are in our community. Can we set up a meet? And I was like, that's awesome. Okay, cool. And so we met
That's
up.
super awesome.
Yeah, I was just like, okay, like I never imagined to actually meet Quincy there. And so we met up over like Google Meets and stuff. And I told him about my story, and he talked about his story, how he came from as an educator and started learning how to code and founding Free Code Camp and all that fun stuff. And
Yeah.
he was like, look, you write some really insightful posts as well, and I think you would be a good writer. Do you want to write for us? And I was like, sure. I don't know what to write about because I'm only like 3 or 4 months in, but I'll figure. I was like, I don't know what to write about. And he's like, yeah, just write about your journey or whatever comes to mind. And I'm like, yeah, I could do that. That sounds fun. So like my first ever post when I signed up as a volunteer contributor was about what I loved about being a beginner software developer and just getting started in my journey. And so I started writing more of those types of posts. And then Quincy reached out to me a few months later. So at this point, this is like, I guess, early 2021. And he was like,
Okay.
look, your posts are doing really well. Are you interested in writing some more technical posts on HTML and CSS? So I was like, well, I don't know. I'm not really like an expert in that. I don't know if I'm going to be good at that. I'm still trying to figure that stuff out myself with CSS. And he was just
Yeah.
like, hey, you would actually be really good at writing beginner tutorials because you're learning this right now and you know how to write for that audience. I was like, okay, cool, I'll try it out. So then he started paying me per article there.
Oh, no way.
And
That's awesome.
yeah, so it was kind of cool. And he was like, look, you can still do your other stuff and perform. Because at that 2021 was interesting because like things kind of started to pick up with performances ish again. And I did a couple of recording sessions and whatnot, but otherwise it was still quiet compared to like what I was used to with performances. And so it still gave me enough
Yeah.
time to like, keep writing for Free Code Camp. So whenever I had time, I would just kind of write an article. And they had like this Trello board of articles that you can kind of pick from these different ideas. And
Okay.
he was like, here, just look at the HTML and CSS category. If you feel comfortable writing about JavaScript, you could do that. And at that point, I was like, I don't know how strong I am in JavaScript just yet. So I kind of like hung around the HTML CSS board a little bit more and started writing articles. And then a few months later, I think this was like in the summer of 2021, he was like, look, your
Hmm.
articles are doing really well. And so we're putting together a team of authors and we want to bring you on as part of the staff on
Oh,
you
no
could
way.
join either. Yeah, you could join either on a part-time or full-time basis. I was like, okay, well, I'll join as part-time right now. And then because I was still like running my sheet music business and I was still performing, so I was like, well, let's start part-time and let's kind of go from
Go
there.
from
And he
there.
was like, yeah, that sounds cool. And so I was officially brought in August of 2021 as a part-time staff
No
member
way.
writing articles. So that's kind of how I got involved with Free Code
Okay.
Camp there.
No, that's super awesome. And I like what you said where, because a lot of people say this all the time. Well, I'm generalizing, but a lot of people are intimidated to start writing.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like you said, you're like, well, I don't know, I'm still new at this, but there, you know, I've been in the industry for a long time. You haven't. So like if I were to write an article about HTML and CSS or whatever getting started, I probably wouldn't have as good a take for somebody who's just learning it. You know what I mean? Like maybe
Mm-hmm.
my article
Right.
would still be helpful, but my point is like so many people are like, well, why am I going to write about HTML? Like 200,000 other people have already written blog posts about it. And I think just, well, one, just writing is always, at least I find, I don't know about yourself, but I find writing things down helps me solidify what I've learned, or like I
Right.
recognize gaps in things that I either forgot to put in, or oh, maybe I don't know that thing as well, and it's kind of a good check as well. But just putting it out there, like, and there's and I did have a question about Free Code Camp, because I've read articles on there, including yours. But can anybody write on Free Code Camp, or is it like, I imagine there must, is there a criteria? Because like when I
Hmm.
worked at Dev 2, for example, like anybody, or if you use Hashnode, you can just start a blog and just start writing stuff. Is it like that on
Right.
Free Code Camp, or how does it work exactly?
Yeah, yeah. So there is an application to be a volunteer contributor there, and I can try to find the link for that as well. And so basically, the application is nice, short and sweet, where you just fill out some basic information about yourself, and then you submit three writing pieces that you've published, and they could just be
Okay.
self-published. So you could either publish it on your own blog or like Dev 2 or Hashnode or something like that, but just some sort of demonstration of your writing. And
Okay.
so I wrote three pieces there, and then I published it on my own website at the time, and then I sent that in with the application, and the application was reviewed and approved. And so I started
Okay.
working as volunteer contributor there before being brought on as like a official like team member at the time there. But yeah, that's the basic process. So those are like the
Okay.
two authors. There's an actual staff author team that gets paid to write certain articles, and they'll assign you headlines, and then you just research about those headlines and write about
Okay.
that. And then there are the volunteer contributors where you can write one article per year, or you can write one article per week, or whatever like frequency
Okay.
you
Whatever
want to
you want to
do.
do, basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's cool. That's cool. So, yeah. So, just for folks, 'cause I know there's a bunch of other folks that just joined recently. So we're talking with Jessica Wilkins. She's currently at this dot labs, which we'll start talking about that in a bit. But yeah, she started off with a music career. Gonna give her a big shout out. She most recently went out on a high, and no biggie, just played for the NFL orchestra for the Super Bowl. No biggie, just like your typical Wednesday night or whatever. But yeah, and then yeah, we've been just talking about Free Code Camp. She does writing there, and yeah, I guess so. So you did this project about black musicians and the history of, like, just for your, well, I think it's partially for yourself to learn, like, hey, where, but it's also a great resource, and then you got into writing and putting those things together. These are, I guess, is this when you started to do more coding, or like, how did, like, I know you did some coding, obviously, because you did that project, but were you doing, while you were doing the Free Code Camp stuff, you were still doing the sheet music business as well, like you said. So were you
Right.
still spending some time coding, or when did, I guess, like, how did it transition to kind of working full time in tech now, I guess, is what I'm getting. That's my
Yeah.
super long winded
Yeah.
way to say
Yeah, no
that.
worries. No worries there. Yeah, my journey was like interesting because like I know a lot of people start with the intention of I'm going to get a tech job. I'm going to start learning and get a
Yeah.
tech job. My intention was I just want to build this site and see if I can learn some coding and build this thing, and we'll see how it goes. And then so the first year I kind of vacillated back and forth of like, do I want this as a career? Do I
Yeah.
not? What's going on? So that was like the whole first year, but I was coding throughout, and I was taking different courses and whatnot, and building different like class projects and smaller projects, and building other side projects just for learning. And then there would be seasons where I was like, well, maybe I do want a career. And then there were other seasons
Mm.
where it's like, no, I want to go back to music,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I couldn't make up my mind like that whole first year of like, am I actually going to make a career change? And so the deciding factor is I turned down a job that kind of came out of nowhere, but
Okay.
it was for Disney there for music, and I surprisingly like I didn't like think I was going to turn that down, and I saw myself turning that down to pursue software, and
Okay.
I was like, did I just do that? Like, why did I just do that? And I was like, I guess we're going to have a career in software, and so that's when I
Yeah.
started kicking it into high gear when I turned that job down. I was like, okay, well, I guess we're gonna make that shift. And so that's why I like started
Yeah.
learning more and kind of started learning about
Okay.
different companies and opportunities there. Yeah.
No, that's cool. And I'm curious. I'm just curious about Disney. Like Disney is like the last place on earth I want to go myself because like, just like, uh, just I don't know the whole. I like Disney and Marvel and that's not what I mean. I mean like going to actually Disney World. That is like probably the last thing on the planet I would want to do. But that's just me. Probably I know a lot of people love it, but in terms of music there, what would the role have been like would it be for shows in the evening, or is this something like just like musicals there, or like what kind of work
Mhm.
would that have been, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so that opportunity just came out of left field, and I think it was around 20, what was that? I think it was like April or May of 2021. And so I got a text message from a contractor and friend that I had worked with for many years, who's plays bassoon and is a conductor and does a whole bunch of like major recording sessions for like Disney and
Okay.
Fox and all those. And so he reached out to me and he was like, "Hey, I have a friend who works at Disney who's looking to put together a team of
Okay.
music arrangers and copyists, and I think you'd be a great fit because you got this sheet music company." And so he wants to kind of handpick his team, and so I suggested that you go talk with him. I was like, "Oh,
Hmm.
okay. Who's your friend?" And then he was like, "Oh yeah, he's like the head of the music prep department at Disney." I was like, "Oh, okay." Why don't you
No
lead with
biggie.
that? I was like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "Yeah, I can like introduce you guys." And so I was like, "Whoa, this is like left field." And so I took
Yeah.
the meeting and we kind of talked for like 45 minutes. And I was very candid about like I'm learning how to code, not sure if I wanted to like switch careers and stuff, but I had spent my whole life in
Yeah.
music. And he talked about his background. He was like, "Well, the role would start off where you would take a lot of the new scores and projects that we're doing for Disney and Disney Plus and whatnot, and then you would start to do some music arrangements for us and be in the studios with us and doing some
Okay.
copyist work where you basically take the scores from the composers and then help input it into Finale and Sibelius, which are like music notation software. And then you would also work on some music arrangements, and then also
Okay.
we would also throw you some work working in the studios there, since you're part of this
Okay.
family now." And I was like, "Whoa, okay." I
Okay.
was like,
Yeah. No.
that's
So
pretty big there.
yeah, I was gonna say, so like to have all that potentially, and it's something you enjoy doing, and you're like, I'm gonna give this tech thing a go. That's like going
It's
on a limb.
crazy.
Like
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's something I'd kind of do too. Part of my structured YOLO. When you're presented with some good opportunities, just give it a go. Like doesn't necessarily mean you have to move to Antarctica or something, but like.
Right.
But okay, so that's cool. So you turned down the Disney role, and then did the role you take is out this dot labs now, or were you somewhere else before, or
Yeah, so when I turned that down, I had done some like other contracting work there and freelancing for like web dev and stuff like that. But then that's when I started looking at companies where I was like, okay, what are some companies that are like mentorship friendly, junior dev friendly,
okay?
and whatnot, where I could actually grow and learn. And so I had
Hmm.
been going to the Women in Tech meetup that this dot had.
Okay.
And that's like a monthly meetup for women to kind of just talk about different things in the industry and kind of connect there and a networking opportunity. And so I was already like familiar with this dot labs, and then they had an apprentice, or still have an apprentice program. And I met a few women who had gone through the apprenticeship program and talked
Okay.
with them, and they had spoke highly about it. And I was like, well, maybe that sounds like something I could do. And because that sounded like a good like stepping stone between
Hmm.
starting to learn on my own into getting full time into the tech industry. And so I kind of vacillated, like, should I apply? Am I ready to apply? Whatnot. And I talked with
Yeah.
one of my good friends, Daisy Nolan, who's also part
Okay.
of Virtual Coffee there. And she was like, yeah, I went through it. It was a great experience. You should totally just apply and see what happens. So I was like, okay, cool. So
Let's do it.
I applied, and then I reached out to Tracy, who's the CEO of this dot labs, on Twitter. I was like, hey, I just
Yeah.
applied, and she's like, oh, that's great. Okay. And so I started, went through the interview process, and did the coding challenge and all that fun stuff. And I was brought on as an apprentice. And so
Okay.
that's where it all started. The full-time tech journey
Okay.
started for me. I was like, okay, cool. We're doing this. So yeah.
No, that's super cool, and I've never met Tracy, but I've I've talked to her in DMs on Twitter, and I check out a lot of the events, and she seems like good people.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to meet her at some point, but yeah, so that's cool, and yeah, so I guess so you're doing the apprenticeship now, so they do. I mean, they're a contracting company more, right? Is that what they are? That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
They
So
can join the Twitch, whoever's on the phone.
right. I was like, they can join later. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was an apprentice for about 3 months before being promoted to SE1 there. And so it was cool to be able to stay, like, have the opportunity to stay obviously longer with the company, because I was learning a lot and really enjoyed the work there. But I started off as a contractor there, still working 40 hours a week. And then
Okay.
once I got bumped up to software engineer one, then that's when I was like a full time employee there.
Okay.
And so it was really cool to like be
Awesome.
given that opportunity to learn and grow and kind of see what this life was all about there.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm not sure who it is, but one of your coworkers just dropped in the chat, Shiroko. Not sure who
Oh,
that is, but they,
yeah,
they
yeah. I
were like,
posted in
she's full time
the
now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I did start off as an apprentice, and then I yeah moved to full time there. So that
Ah,
was
okay.
really cool, because like when it came to the end of the apprenticeship, it's either you move full time, or they help get you into their next role. I was like,
Okay.
oh, we'll see what happens. Maybe I can stay, or we'll see
Yeah,
where I
yeah. Yeah.
go. And so I was fortunate enough to be asked to stay full time. I was like, oh, that's so cool.
Okay.
So yeah.
No, that is awesome. And Shiroko's like, I'm their manager. So it's like, okay. Yeah. Well, you got a good hire in Jessica. She's good people and super cool background, man. It's like I I went to school for computer science and I did graduate, but I did learn some things obviously, but I definitely don't think it's a requirement to become a dev, honestly. Like of all the stuff I learned there, like I took three three courses in calculus up to like Cal 3 and then something else, and I haven't used calculus ever in any, it's
Right,
I think
right,
the only math I've really had to do in web development is like either calculating positions for stuff in CSS
right. Yeah,
or like a checkout process where you're calculating a total and like pulling in taxes. But aside from that, because like I don't know, I'm not working in anything kind of scientific, but it's like,
right,
and
right.
the only thing I remember that helped me by having a degree, and it's like a maybe, is like my first job I got paid slightly more because I had a degree, but aside from that nobody ever asks about it. I mean, it's on my LinkedIn, but like
Right, right.
I think it's also cool, like I was saying before, like just coming from a different area, like and even though people might not realize it, like there's a lot of math in music, and there's just stuff like
Right.
there's
There's a
I don't
lot
know
going
it.
on there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like, and I mean, I'm not a, like I said, I was in a handbell choir and did piano, so like I could read sheet music and stuff, but like, at the level you're doing it, like it's pretty impressive. It's like I've seen some more, I don't know if you'd say orchestral shows, but it's like it's pretty badass. So yeah.
It's cool to hear the word badass and orchestra in the same the same sentence there. I think it's pretty cool too.
Yeah. So cool. So yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah. So Kirk is saying it is badass. Yes, and Becca is agreeing with an emoji. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. I'm trying to think. Is there? This has been awesome talking. I'm trying to think. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, or stuff you got
Um,
exciting going on for 2023? I always
yeah,
book these
it's
for like an hour and a half, but it's like we never always have to do an hour and a half.
right,
It's just
right.
because if I'm live coding with somebody, sometimes it goes like the whole way. So,
Right,
um,
right, right.
but
Yeah, I think for 2023, I really want to kind of pick back up with the Black Excellence Music Project again because I had some ideas of kind of pushing that forward. And I think in 2023, I'm going to kind of focus on kind of getting back into that project. And then I also had an idea of like starting up a blog because I do tons of writing.
yeah,
And those in the chat, especially Becca's in the chat there. She always jokes that I when November that November writing challenge comes around, I'm like, yes, we're gonna. I'm all about that challenge there, and so I love to write there. So I was thinking about starting a
yeah.
blog and just kind of blogging about what I'm going through in life there, and yeah.
Okay.
So those are some projects kind of on the horizon.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I just call that writing month Nanaimo bar because I can never pronounce it properly. But
Right.
um, or it's Nanaimo, or I forget what it is. But yeah, I kind of always laugh because like you obviously enjoy writing. So I'm like, oh, Jessica wrote a post. Okay, so we're 50% of the way of our writing goal this year.
Right. Yeah, I mean, once I get in the zone there and I just start writing there, and then I look up, it's like, oh, I wrote some stuff there. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Cool. Well, listen, this has been amazing. I loved everything about this. It's such a cool story. And yes, orchestras are badass.
Yes.
But can we
Yes.
say oboes are badass? I don't know. Like, I feel
Oboes
like,
are they are badass. Yes, they're still temperamental little teenagers, but when you get it right, it sounds really cool. I promise. There.
yeah. Oboe, clean your room and then we can have fun. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yes.
Cool, cool, cool. Awesome. Well, this has been so amazing, Jessica. Like I said, this is the last stream for this year. I might do one before the holidays just on my own, kind of messing around with something. But yeah, no, it's been super great. I'm gonna drop a bunch of links where folks can follow you. So your website, Twitter, GitHub, and LinkedIn. I also will drop the Black Excellence Music Project again if folks want to check that out. Is that a the other thing I was going to say is you have some open source projects with Free Code Camp. Is that ongoing stuff, or was that just for Hacktoberfest, or?
Yeah. So now I'm still helping out with one of their open source projects, which is the developer quiz site.
Okay.
And we primarily use that. That was an interesting project because like it started as a companion site to the Learn to Code RPG game that came out
Okay.
in December of 2021 last year. And Quincy had approached me last year before I started working full time with this dot.
Yeah.
We were sourcing all of these questions and writing all these questions for the Learn to Code RPG game, which basically it's like this game that follows this girl named Lydia, and her story arc is like she's a barista, but she wants to learn how to code, and so she learns how to code through like all these quiz questions and stuff. So it's like a fun little game and that you can
Okay.
play. And so they were like, well, we need to come up with these quiz questions. And so like, it was like 4 or 5 of us just like, churning out all like hundreds of quiz questions and like proofreading them, the
Okay.
weeks leading up to the launch of this game. And so we decided to create a website where people could keep playing the quiz outside of the Learn to Code game. And so Quincy's like, let's
Yeah.
create this. Maybe we could just whip up a React app or something like that and create a nice little quiz. And I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. So a few of us kind of whipped that up the week before the launch and added all of those quiz questions that we wrote for the actual developer quiz site. And so we
Okay.
launched that all at the same time. And the actual repository was quiet for like the majority of the year and part of that was because like I wasn't really like maintaining it. Like I was there to like, help with pull requests if they came in, but it was really, really quiet like majority of the year. And so it
Okay.
wasn't until September where I reached out to Quincy. I was like, hey, I know you guys are launching like a new version of Learn to Code RPG game, and we still have this repo that's here. Maybe we could ask the community for some more questions questions. And he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. Do you want to help out with Hacktoberfest? I was like, yeah, sure. So I had zero clue what I was getting myself into because I
Okay.
did not know how many PRs were going to come in. I was like, I don't know, maybe like 20 or so. I was way off. I had no clue. And so we ended up like getting 350 like plus PRs, like,
Okay.
approved and merged and all that. But it was great because the community came in and they're like, oh, I have quiz questions on HTML and CSS and Python and testing and all that fun stuff. So it was great to see the questions come in and being able to use that for the future release of the next version of the game there. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that was pretty fun. So I'm still active with that. Now it's back to being really quiet because
Okay.
Hacktoberfest is
Okay.
over. But it
Yeah.
was really cool because it gave an opportunity for especially newer developers to contribute to a repository and contribute something meaningful, which is what a lot of people are always looking for, where it's like, okay, I don't want something super challenging, but I also want to
Mm-hmm.
contribute in a meaningful way. And so that was like the perfect mix of both of those. So I think that's why
Yeah.
we got that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, I dropped a link to the GitHub. I did a quick Google and the
Mm-hmm.
developer quiz org site. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely check those out. Yeah, it's been awesome, Jessica. I'm gonna try this because I generally don't raid other streams, but there's Alex Trost. He's hosting a Doctors Without Borders fundraiser right now. So I'm going to try
Mm-hmm.
it. This may work. It might not work. So feel free to stay on. I'm just going to raid over there, folks. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Jessica, thanks so much.
Thank
And
you.
I will see you in 2023.
All right. Thanks.